some of you are worried about how do we actually stay, you're thinking how do we actually just stay connected to those people, assuming that eventually we can have the discussions that we need to have with them when they become necessary. And then the other question is like, what do we actually need to communicate to them? Is there something in general as innovators that we could say to content people, for instance, before we put the finishing touches on this, is there something that you would like to request so that we don't make your job of like redoing all your content that much more difficult, right? I mean, something along those lines. One is the very specific messages that we may have at this point in the time of the development of technology, and the other is a much more logistical question. It's how do we take the conference into our lives from now on, right? Since we're just getting the people from the knowledge sharing track back in here now, and since we'll probably hand the mic over to the people who are expected to present within 10 minutes, let's go back to the original intention, which is try to come up, if we can, with one or two simple things that we want to ask them, find out their opinions about. It could just be informative. Maybe we just have one specific question about what they've been doing, rather than expecting that the one person randomly delegated to talk to us about what they talked about will say that thing. Or maybe you've got particular questions. So does anyone have something that you think might help us to bridge the kind of gap that's existed between UN headquarters and UNICEF here over the last 2 days? Obviously, this is the hard question, so. You almost raised your hand.
I'd like to have the person that majority of people in that workshop think is one of the better or best knowledge management people in that group say what he does on a day-to-day basis to stay informed.
You want them to nominate someone?
Well, I mean, they don't. It'd be really great, like real-world experience. Whoever they think does a very good job of keeping on top of this within the UN organizations or beyond.
And you want to know how they stay up to date about what the innovations are?
Yeah, I mean, like how they're doing knowledge management.
We can write this next half hour, so does anyone have another suggestion about what they'd like? We don't have to just listen to recap, right? No, thank you. Go ahead.
Maybe as the follow-up to the current meeting, the Web4Development can set up the forum for continuing the discussions and bringing up the updates on both the research agenda around the innovative products as well as some latest developments and discussions around the issues. So forums organized around the specific topics, maybe.
Great. So that's, yeah, we've got one on both sides now, and the forum does kind of tend towards the so far radically underused Web4Dev.org wiki, which we have all been able to participate in and add stuff to, but it's so far got not a whole host of content. Any other comments on this, on these possible ways of kind of introducing ourselves and trying to make sure that we interact better with our colleagues whose professional concerns are somewhat different from ours?
So I don't know if anyone's mentioned this yet, but there's been a strong request on Twitter, as you were mentioning earlier, to implement a crabgrass version for members of Web4Dev to share knowledge and work together interactively in a way that sort of has better attribution than just a wiki. Or attribution, dynamism.
Just a better platform, yeah. There may not, what Kate's suggesting is there's UNICEF is kind of moving away, I think, and I'm not the authority to speak on this at all, but there's a new platform, Rise Up Labs is developing it. It's been spoken of here and there. It's entirely open source. It's a great place for collaborative work. It's a lot less tedious than a wiki, and where it's unfamiliar, you'll probably like it more. So that might be a good way to go. Any other suggestions? Somebody else has them.
Yeah, that was the first question.
Were you going to ask the same thing?
Who are you, darling?
Yeah, that's great. Someone please do that. That's wonderful. I can't.
Okay, you have the microphone? Go. No, you don't have the microphone. All right.
That was me. I mentioned it on Twitter, and I'll install it if someone has a server. So if someone has a server somewhere and we can point DNS for Web4Dev at it, I'll set it up.
Well met. Who's got a server? You know each other? You can make that connection? Great. Okay, cool. That's concrete. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to raise the question of the whole basis of what we're talking about right now. I mean, we're all, geeks and all that type of thing. But I mean, the point is that the internet model and the mobile model have essentially undone the economic models in which we've all grown up on, which includes intellectual property rights, which includes gender, empowerment, which includes the construction of large-scale systems and all the rest of it.
That's a good question. I think that the basis that we're talking about this on is that we're not all geeks in the room, specifically because the people who are in the knowledge sharing track, who make their careers out of sharing knowledge, often don't understand at all the technology that's enabling them to do what they do. And this little kind of temporary session sprung out of the desire of the people who may or may not be referred to as geeks to reach out to the knowledge sharing people and say, all right, we've been in different buildings for a little while, but since we do overlap professionally now and then, how can we kind of lubricate those transactions? How can this feel less like we just hand you some new horrible thing from above that makes you do everything all over again and, go forward nicely? So we've got the one suggestion, which actually seems like it may become concrete, to host a crabgrass installation that can carry the conversations and the networking from this conference forward, which is great. Let me just double check. Did you want to go back to? Okay, so we got one thing out of that, which is what we were trying to do. There's 4 people who are expecting to give you a bit of recap on what's been going on in the 2 different buildings. So I will hand the mic over to whichever one of them is scheduled to go first. Thank you. Who is it? While we figure out who that person is, if anybody in the room was about to raise their hand to talk about any of the things on the 2 whiteboards, now would be a great time. Excellent.
Timothy, the chair of the last session, is on his way.
Okay, so when Timothy gets here, we'll start with him, and he can raise his hand. But as I was asking, was there anyone who was kind of feeling engaged in either of these discussions and about to say something who still wants to raise their hand? Great. Merrick.
So in the design and context group, it was all talking about engaging and working with the people that are going to be using the product. And so I think that it's not so much that we're sitting over here and just thinking of cool technology we can build. Maybe a few of us are, but most of us aren't. And they're sitting over there thinking about their needs for information transfer. And so these are the people that we're working with on a daily basis and interacting with. And we should be tailoring our solutions in conversation with them. We should be building the tools in conversation with them. So maybe we just need a way to say, well, what were your biggest problems? Like what kind of problems are you having? Some of them can be solved by technology. Lots of them can't.
Right. That's great. So, I mean, the forum that we're talking about might be a step in that direction. It's nice because I'm a content person and Merrick is technically a geek who I often have to go back and forth on and bridging this exact same divide.